to quickly talk a little bit with you about what we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks, right? Because we only have 3 class meetings after this one, and 2 of them are going to be work sessions, right? So today we're talking about Mother Courage. Next time we're going to be talking about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. On the 22nd, you'll be working in class on your group presentation, so you can bring laptops, devices, whatever sorts of things you need to sit together and get work done on that. On the 29th, you will be bringing your paper to class for peer review. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute because, as you know, if you read my email over the weekend, there are some changes to how you're going to be doing the paper, right? Minor changes, things that I think will actually make your lives easier, but changes nonetheless. And I do want all of you to meet with me and to meet with Megan about the final paper, right? So you can set up with Megan through the Writing Center when you want to meet with her about it. I will be available pretty much all day on the 30th and on December 1st. November is a 30-day month, right? Okay, yes, good, all right. Yes. Okay, so yeah, I'll be in my office from 9 to 5 on both of those days. So you have both of the reading days during the exam period, right? Barring a 2-hour period, which will be determined tomorrow. So on Thursday, I'll tell you when not to come see me. But otherwise, just come see me anytime on the Wednesday and Thursday that are the reading days, right? Now, as far as the directions for the paper are concerned, right, we've decided, I've decided to scrap the discussion board for reasons I will discuss in a moment. But what this means for you as far as the paper is concerned, right, you're just picking one of the texts on the syllabus, one of the plays on the syllabus to write your paper about, right? So you can do Antigone, you can do Hamlet, you can do A Dollhouse, you can do Mother Courage, you can do Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, right? You don't have to select a play from the discussion board list this time. And the reasons for this is that the discussion board has this is something I've been trying for a couple of semesters now, and it's never done what I want it to do. Essentially, I wanted it to be a space for you to be able to, one, have some choices about what you read, rather than just having me assign things to you. It was supposed to be sort of a space where you could sort of talk about these things with each other and respond to each other, maybe help each other out. And it seems that for everyone involved, it just becomes a chore. And just an extra thing that you have to do that no one is really... Some of you have been posting consistently, which is good, and you'll still get credit for posting. But no one really seems to have very deeply engaged with it. And so I think I just have to sort of say, okay, this is an experiment that has failed, and we'll move on from there. So, like I said, if you were posting, you still get credit. If you weren't posting, that's still probably a little bit of a problem for you, but you're not going to have to worry about doing so for the plays, right? So just choose one of the plays we've read for class to do your paper on. Does anybody have any questions about the final paper, about the group presentation, or about anything that's going on as we wrap up the class? Okay. Then let's talk about Mother Courage. What'd you think? How'd this go for you?
Terrible.
Why terrible?
It was like, I started reading, I was just like, what is it talking about?
Uh-huh.
And then I couldn't find the book, so I read it online.
Okay.
And I was like, I can't see, here's my name, I can't see shit. So I started zooming in, I was like, what is she talking about? I fell asleep on 8 times, woke up, tried to read it again. It was just terrible. I was just like, I have no idea. It was just terrible.
And it was just you couldn't figure out what was going on, or just couldn't hold your interest, or
It was terrible. I was just like, oh my god. But I was like, I have to read this. It was terrible.
okay. Well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but we have to get through this somehow. So maybe, was there anybody who had an easier time with it, getting through it, or?
Well, I had read the wrong one, so I wouldn't but it was just confusing for me. I guess all the names and like the fact that one of them was Swiss cheese, like watching Swiss cheese.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Wait, are you talking about Mother Courage?
Well, the name Swiss cheese is actually symbolic, right? How does he die?
He got shot?
Yeah, he's executed by a firing squad. He's shot full of holes,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah, the name itself is a kind of foreshadowing. And I think that maybe part of what the problem you're having is the kind of expectations you have about what a play is supposed to look like and how it's supposed to be put together. And this probably looks a little bit weird from that kind of angle. So, I'm going to start then by framing this in terms of what Ibsen was doing, this, the sort of things we would have talked about regarding a dollhouse, and how that shapes what Brecht is doing in this play, right? So we're going to start with some of the conventions of 19th century drama. Right now, most 19th century plays are terrible, and not terrible in the way you found this terrible. Just, objectively lousy. How many of you have ever heard of melodrama? Do you know what melodrama is, what that word means? Kind of? Okay, what do you associate with melodrama? If someone's being melodramatic, what does that mean?
It's like over-exaggerated.
Yeah, like really over-exaggerated emotions, right? Really over the top. And what melodramas were, right? They were these usually pretty short little plays, and they tended to follow the same basic pattern, right? You had, your poor innocent heroine who can't pay the rent. I can't pay the rent. And then your villain comes sweeping in with his black cape and top hat and twirling mustache, and you must pay the rent. But I haven't the money for the rent. Then you must sacrifice your virtue to me. And then your hero steps in with the money and says, I'll pay the rent. I'm saved. Curses, foiled again. Right, that's melodrama. That's what that looks like. And it's a pattern you actually still see on television, right? You still see it in popular fiction. Yeah, Cabriana.
That sounds like the Powerpuff Girls.
Yeah. Powerpuff Girls episodes will follow some of that similar pattern. Soap operas follow this pattern. All sorts of mistaken identities, right? And people just coming back from the dead to suddenly save the day when they're most needed, right? And the point of melodrama was usually, one, to give the audience exactly what they want, right? A predictable story with a happy ending and clearly drawn good and evil characters. Because we don't like things that surprise us, right? We don't like things that make us feel stupid. And no one ever feels stupid watching a melodrama. Right? Haha, I saw that coming. It was also a chance for star actors to show off the range of different emotions they could play. Right? That's why we now associate somebody who's being really over the top emotional with being melodramatic, right? That style of acting was encouraged in this sort of play. And what Ibsen was doing in A Dollhouse was criticizing this particular play structure, right? Up until the end, A Dollhouse kind of looks like this kind of play, right? You've got, Nora Helmer is your heroine who's trapped, in a sticky financial situation by Nils Krogstad, the dastardly banker, right? And you think that Torvald, her husband, is going to be the hero who comes in and steps in and saves the day. This is why she keeps talking about the miracle that's going to happen, right? That's what she's talking about. She's talking as though she's living in one of these melodramas. The miracle is Torvald is going to step in and fix everything. And then when he gets Krogstad's note, and instead of fixing everything, he hauls her into his office and starts verbally abusing her, that's where the melodrama breaks down, right? And reality sets in. So what Ibsen was trying to do was present a more sort of realistic look at 19th century European middle-class life, right? Normal middle-class characters behaving in normal middle-class ways, getting caught in normal middle-class situations. But what's the problem with that kind of straightforward realism? There are a couple of problems with it. What's the plot problem it creates?
I forgot the word, sorry.
Well,
It's predictable, there you go.
okay, on the one, yeah, everyday life isn't really that interesting, right? Yeah, I mean, like if you pay $15 to go see a James Bond movie, do you want to see a bloated Daniel Craig sitting on his couch shoving Cheetos into his mouth? No. Which is probably what he does when he's not making movies? No, of course you don't, right? I mean, if you look at reality television, right? If you look at, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, or 19 Kids and Counting, or Little People Big World, or any of these kinds of shows, like, are these people interesting to you because they're normal?
No.
Yeah, if you just watch normal people live, like, you can look around you and see normal people living normal life, right? Much of which has little dramatic conflict in it, right? So we're generally more interested in watching people who are somehow larger than life, right? Who are in some way strange, in some way weird. The other problem, the problem that someone like Bertolt Brecht sees in realist drama, is that, Ibsen had a real argument he was trying to make about human rights, right? Essentially, he was arguing that 19th century bourgeois society stunted the emotional and intellectual growth of both men and women. But someone like Brecht would say, it's like, well, wait a minute. You get so caught up in the Helmer's story and in the Helmer's relationship and in identifying with particular characters in a realist play that you forget the arguments, right? That the argument becomes somehow secondary. So what Brecht is trying to do is bring the argument of the play to the forefront, right? One of the reasons this probably looked weird to you is because in a lot of ways it's not a story. Right? It's not a play that tells a story, except in a relatively oblique way. It's a play about ideas, and the ideas are more important than the plot. Now, Brecht referred to his style of theater as epic theater. And he started to develop it in Germany in the 1930s. Now, what else do we know was going on in Germany in the 1930s?
World War II.
World War II hadn't started yet, but it was on its way. Right? What is actually going on in Germany in the 30s that's leading into the war?
The formation of the National Socialist Party.
Yeah, the rise of the Nazis. The Nazis come to power in Germany in the 30s. Now, Brecht, as a member of a socialist party, not a national socialist party, National Socialism and socialism are actually completely different things. As a member of a socialist party, Brecht is part of a club that the Nazis don't like. Right? In addition to various ethnic groups they target, right? We know the Nazis targeted Jews, they targeted gypsies, anyone who didn't meet the particular Aryan ideal, right, that sort of blonde-haired, blue-eyed Germanic ideal. They also targeted people who they felt were ideologically traitors to the German nation. So trade union members, socialists, communists also went into the camps. So Brecht is a member of one of these groups that is persona non grata in Germany in the 1930s. So what he is trying to communicate has to take the form of, like, you know, some sort of, you know, artistic form in order to get out. But he wants people to really dwell on the ideas in his plays and not the plot or the characters. So there are a couple of things he does that are called, he calls alienation effects. Right? Essentially, things that are supposed to get you out of identification with the characters, to get you out of being wrapped up in the story, and to constantly remind you that you're watching a play, that this is fiction. This is not real. Why is it so hard to construct a continuous narrative out of this play? How are the different little scenes structured? They do move chronologically, right? But how straightforward is their connection to each other?
I mean, they might be like, it's like 2 years, 3 years later, they're like not in, like, they're not in this time span, they're like in this time span.
Yeah, we have a wider time span than we're used to in a play, right? Most plays that we're used to reading take place within a time span of roughly 24 hours. This takes place over a course of years. And it's structured as a series of episodes, right, that happen over the course of a number of years rather than as a continuous story. Right? So we'll see our characters pulling their wagon, through Bohemia at one point, and then we won't see them again for another 3 or 4 years, right? And things have changed in that time. So you don't get wrapped up in a continuous storyline. That's one of Brecht's alienation effects. What about the way the scenes are introduced? What do we have at the beginning of each of these scenes?
A time period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have these big block letters, right? Like, spring 1624, the Swedish commander-in-chief, Count Oxenstierna, is raising troops in Dalecarlia for the Polish campaign. The canteen woman Anna Fearling, known under the name of Mother Courage, loses one son. So we have these cards that are held up at the beginning of every act, at the beginning of every scene, that tell you what's going to happen in the scene. So that it becomes less about suspense, right? It's not about keeping you on the edge of your seat. It's about letting you know what's going to happen in the scene so that you then pay attention to the content of the scene, the argument of the scene. So we have these scenes broken up with explanatory signs. Now, if you look at the cast list for this play, how easy do you think it would be to put on a production of this? How easy do you think it would be to get enough people for this play?
Kind of easy.
Why would you say kind of easy?
Because it's not that many. They use the same people throughout most of the play.
But there are a lot of different characters, right?
They do double parts.
Exactly. Much like the Greeks did. Goes back to that double and triple casting thing, right? So you have a large cast, but actors are double cast, yes. Brecht is actually really popular in university drama departments, though, because his plays have so many different characters and so many different parts, right? If you have a lot of people, you have to get involved in the play. Right, it's like Little League, everybody gets to play, right? Brecht is actually a good sort of go-to choice because then everybody gets assigned a single role. But then that also defeats Brecht's actual purpose. He wants directors to double and triple cast these parts. So the people will recognize the same actor coming back again and again and again as a different character, and so that it will take them out of the story. Now, what about the setting here, right? Brecht is writing in the 1930s, but what kind of setting does he give this?
16 something?
Yeah, it's in the 17th century. Does anybody know
26.
what specific war he's talking? Yeah,
The
right.
30 Year War.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this takes place during the 30 Years' War. Now, how many of you know anything about the 30 Years' War? How many of you give a flying fuck about the 30 Years' War? Probably none of you, right? And that's the point. Now think again about when he's writing this. He's writing an anti-war play, right? A play with a strong anti-war message in the 1930s. He has a much more recent conflict he could draw on, right? To make similar arguments. What would seem to be the obvious choice of war for him?
The one currently.
Well, he sees one about to happen and he's trying to stop it. But the one there's one in recent memory as well, right?
Was 18?
Which one?
World War I, yeah. Ended in 1918, yeah. Yeah. So he could set his anti-war play in the First World War, right? But then, what problem would that create if he's trying to get people not to get involved in the plot or with the characters?
Forget about that, exactly. And
Because they're thinking about the first war.
Yeah.
Instead
Trying
of-
to make a connection.
Exactly. There are going to be people alive in his audience who remember that war, who probably had relatives who served, who may have served themselves. And so, they are going to have a hard time getting past their own feelings about that war. So, if he sets it 300 years in the past to a war no one alive remembers, and that even his German audience probably this is to them just something in a history book, right? They're not going to care so much. So one of the most common alienation effects he uses is a remote historical setting. Almost all of Brecht's plays are about contemporary ideas and contemporary events, but they're rarely given contemporary settings because he wants to, again, distance you from what's going on. Now, what do we also frequently see the characters doing breaking into in the middle of scenes in this play? Yeah, lots of song and dance, right? How often do people do this in real life? Yeah. Well, I don't know about never, but not frequently, right? Or I don't know. I don't know how many theater people you hang out with, but maybe they do it a little bit more often than others. But yeah, by and large, people don't just break into song and dance in the middle of an argument. So yeah, the song and dance routines are another way he tries to distance you from what's going on. And the songs almost always come back to the central message of the play, right? Which is about war and economics. Now, the other thing that he does, and this won't come through in reading it, but he would also recommend to directors that the cast change sets between scenes in front of the audience, right? So every time the scene changes, right, instead of dropping the curtain and maybe having a couple of guys dressed like ninjas come in and swipe the stage settings and then put new ones on, the cast members themselves will, in front of the audience, move things around, take things on and off, change costumes, right? So the audience sees the action. So the audience sees, hey, we're switching scenes, we're moving to a different time period now, we're moving to a different place. Right, so these are the basic alienation effects that you will usually find in a Brecht play. It's easier to watch often than it is to read, but unfortunately I couldn't really find a good public domain, i.e. thing I didn't have to pay for, to show you as an example. There is actually a pretty good production starring Meryl Streep that I think you can get on DVD if it's the sort of thing you're interested in, but of course that's not a requirement. Okay, so as far as the play itself here is concerned, what does he seem to want you to get out of this, right? What seems to be the main idea that he's peddling? What ideas does Courage herself, for example, seem to represent?
That's what I got from it. That's what I.
Does Courage herself not like war?
No, not herself.
Yeah.
Yeah, she doesn't want her kids to. Be.
Exactly, yes. War is good for business, right?
Yeah.
Without the war, her canteen cart would go bust. But she doesn't want to have to sacrifice anything to keep the war going. Right, so what Courage is what's called a war profiteer. Right, basically someone who makes a living off of war, often a very good living, often lots and lots of money, without actually giving anything back, right? We often use the term war profiteer to describe, in fact, like a crook. Now, what about her children? Right, she's got 3 children. Right, Eilif, Swiss cheese, and Katrin. What do they like?
The first one wants to go to war.
Yeah, Eilif is very aggressive, right? He's very aggressive. He's easily led off by the soldiers. What else? What other characteristics does he seem to have? How does he rate intellectually compared to his siblings?
He's the smartest of them all.
Yeah, Eilif's the clever one. Swiss cheese is the dumb one,
Yeah,
right? Eilif's the clever one. Yes. Eilif is the clever one. He's aggressive, he's clever, he's courageous. All right, if we look at Eilif's great deed, right? If you can turn to scene 2. Starting on page 13. Let's see, can I get a couple of volunteers here? Can I get an Eilif, a general, and a chaplain? Eilif, anybody feel dashing and brave today?
I don't need the dumb.
All right, right, yes, Forrest, you be Eilif. General. All right, Caitlin, be the general, and a chaplain. Chaplain doesn't have to talk much. All right, Cabriana, be the chaplain.
So it's scene 2.
Scene 2, yes, starting with, well, it was like this sea. Eilif. Bottom of page 13.
I have different pages.
Yeah.
Because this is scene 2, but it says something else.
You might have a different translation.
This says the cook or something.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, well, it's the same play, but yeah, look, your page numbers are probably different. And yeah, it's a different translation.
Well, I can read general.
Okay, can I get a different chaplain then? Somebody with this book. All right, Callie, go for it. All right, so bottom of page 13. Well, it was like this. See.
Well, it was like this, see? I heard peasants had been driving the oxen they had hidden out of the forest into one particular wood on the sly, and mostly by night. That's where people from the town were supposed to come and pick them up. So I holds off and lets them drive their oxen together, reckoning they'd be better than me at finding them. I had my blokes slavering after the meat cut their emergency rations even further for a couple of days, till their mouths were watering at the least sound of any word beginning with me, like would say.
Very clever.
Possibly. The rest was a piece of cake, except that the peasants had cudgels and outnumbered us 3-1 and made a murderous attack on us. 4 of them shoved me into a thicket, knocked my sword from my hand, and bawled out, "Surrender!" What's the answer, I wondered? They're going to make mincemeat of me.
What did you do?
I laughed.
You did what?
Laughed. So we got talking. I put it on business footing from the start. Told them 20 florins a head's too much. I'll give you 15, as I was meaning to pay. That threw them, and they began scratching their heads. In a flash, I picked up my sword and was hacking them to pieces. Necessity's the mother of invention, eh, sir?
What is your view, Pastor?
The phrase is not strictly speaking in the Bible, but when our Lord turned the 5 loaves of bread into 500, there was no war on, and he could tell people to love thy neighbor as thine had enough to eat. Today is another story.
Quite another story. You could have this week after all that, roll Pharisee, hack, let me say to hype or whatever.
Yep.
Okay. Hack them to pieces, did you? So my gallant lads could get a proper bite to eat. What did the script say? Whatsoever thou doubts for the least of my brethren, thou doubts for me, and what did you do for them? Got them a good square meal of beef, because they're not actors, moldy bread, the old way. The old way was to fix a cold meal of rolls and wine in your helmet before you went out to fight for God.
In a flash, I picked up my sword and was hacking them to pieces.
He's a making as a young Caesar. You ought to see the king.
I have from a distance. He kind of glows. I'd like to model myself on him.
You've got something in common already. I appreciate soldiers like you. How do you say his name?
Ilif.
Ilif Men of Courage. Somebody like that I treat as I would my own son.
All right, thank you, all 3 of you. Very well done. So Ilif is being praised, he's being commended for his particular special virtues, right? And what did his special virtues lead him to do? He murdered a whole bunch of peasants and stole their cattle, right? In order to feed the army. There's a definite hierarchy in the play, right? Of people who step on others and people who get stepped on. Right? The people who are always getting stepped on, the people at the bottom rung, by and large, are peasants and civilians, right? They're the people who are always sort of suffering for others. They can't keep their crops or their cattle because the army needs food in order to march. So the soldiers from both armies step on the peasants. Meanwhile, the officers abuse the soldiers. Right, we have that scene with the song of the great capitulation, right, where the young soldier is angry because the captain has stolen his bonus. Right, he was supposed to get a reward for saving the colonel's horse, and instead his officer has taken that money to go out carousing on his own. Right, we have a lot of these scenes where the generals, the colonels, the captains don't seem to give a rat's ass about the welfare of their men. Meanwhile, the soldiers don't give a rat's ass about the welfare of the peasants that they're stepping on. Right, the peasants whom they're robbing for food or what have you. So the war creates this kind of cycle of nastiness. Right, this kind of hierarchy. Now, Eilif, as we said, is being commended for these virtues of bravery and cleverness, right? Okay, yeah, tricking the peasants in that way was smart. But if we look at what his mother says then on the next page, right, that must be a rotten general. He's ravenous, all right, but why rotten? Because he's got to have men of courage, that's why. If he knew how to plan a proper campaign, what would he be needing men of courage for? Ordinary ones would do. It's always the same. Whenever there's a load of special virtues around, it means something stinks. I thought it meant things is all right. Know that they stink. Look, suppose some general or king is bone stupid and leads his men up shit creek. Then those men have got to be fearless. There's another virtue for you. Suppose he's stingy and hires too few soldiers. Then they got to be a crowd of Herculeses. And suppose he's slapdash and don't give a bugger. Then they got to be clever as monkeys, else their number's up. Same way they got to show exceptional loyalty each time he gives them impossible jobs. Naught but virtues no proper country and no decent king or general would ever need. In decent countries, folk don't have to have virtues. The whole lot can be perfectly ordinary, average intelligence, and for all I know, cowards. So, ordinary people only need to have special talents, special virtues, to survive when their superiors are idiots, right? If ordinary people have to rely on special virtues, it means something's wrong at the top. That the people who are running the show don't know what they're doing. And what sorts of behavior do we typically see from the people at the top? How safe are they from the ravages of the war they create? Sometimes, right? Much of the time, they remain isolated from it. But there's that once, there's the funeral of the late Imperial Commander Tilly, right? We look on page 47. Too bad about Commander-in-Chief. 22 pairs those socks. He fell by accident, they say. Missed over fields, that was the trouble. General had just been haranguing a regiment, saying it must fight the last man in last round. He was riding back when mist made him lose direction. So he was up front and a bullet got him in the midst of battle. Why do these guys usually stay safe from harm? What deviation in routine got General Tilly killed? Yeah, he's supposed to be in the back. Yes, but he got turned around and gets shot. So yeah, the officer class and the aristocracy come in here for a lot of abuse, right? Because they don't know how to properly run things, because they need other people to do their work for them. The minute things go pear-shaped, they don't know what to do. They die. Now, what about the other two children here? We talked a little bit about Swiss cheese, right, and what the name means. Right? He's called Swiss cheese because he gets shot full of holes. Okay, we get that. Ha-ha, hilarious. What's Swiss, right, we know that Swiss cheese is none too bright, right? What is he? What virtues does he possess?
Honesty.
Yeah, he is honest to the point that it's moronic, right? Right, honest to the point that it seems to affect his sense of self-preservation. And yet, is he always 100% honest with everyone? What's he doing right before he gets killed? Okay, yeah, he's disobeying his mother, yeah. And he seems to be, of all of them, the biggest mama's boy, where he says, yes, mother, no, mother, right? Yes, I'll wear my woolies, mother. And then once he's caught, how does he behave with the Catholic soldiers who've captured him? Is he honest with them?
He has to be tortured to tell the truth.
He has to be tortured to tell them the truth, right? So there's a conflict, there's a conflict here in his sort of sense of honesty, right? In order to remain honest and true to the regiment that hired him as paymaster, he has to lie to these other people. And because he has to lie to these other people, he gets executed. Now there's another factor at work in his death as well, right? Where's Mother Courage when her dashing, clever son is taken off by the recruiter? Well, if we go back to scene one where Eilif is taken off, I'm just trying to identify a pattern here, right? When Eilif is taken off by the recruiter to go and join the Swedish army, what is Mother Courage doing? Yeah, she's selling a belt buckle to the sergeant, right? When Swiss Cheese is about to be executed, what's she doing that prolongs the process of negotiation for his freedom too long?
Something about
Well, what is she going to have to do to get him out?
pay some amount of money.
Yeah, she's going to have to pay a bribe to get him out, right?
And she had the money, but then somebody lost it.
She was trying to lower the bribe, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. She's going to get, all right, I'm going to get 200 florins for the cart. Wait a minute. No, I was going to pledge you the cart, not sell it to you. See if you'll take less money, right? And because she starts haggling over the money, she takes too long, and her son is executed. And then she has to pretend that she has to lie and pretend that she does not know her honest son as they bring the body by, right? So all of Swiss Cheese's honesty necessitates a whole great big raft of deception in order for the rest of the family to survive, right? So this virtue of his doesn't just get him killed, it also requires his family then to behave in a deceitful way. So virtue actually breeds its opposite. Now what about Chaplain, last child? Yeah. Chaplain is dumb. Yeah, Chaplain cannot speak. Why can't she speak?
A soldier put something in her mouth and killed herself.
Yep, childhood war injury, right? She has literally been rendered mute by war. And what seems to be her driving virtue? Yeah. Whenever they see little children in trouble, right? Little animals that the cart has inadvertently crushed, right? She always wants to care for these things. She always wants to care for others. She rushes into that burning building to save the baby. And what's her final act in the play? What's the last thing she does? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I remember it was an H name.
Yes,
Somebody's kid.
Halle is the town. Yeah, it's a town in Germany. Yes. And right, she's praying with the peasants as the Catholic soldiers are about to attack the town. And she hears about the children. And so up she, I see you're making a drumming motion. Yes. Yeah, she climbs up on the roof of the farmhouse and starts drumming in order to wake the town up to warn them of the attack, right? So once again, it's her kindness, right, her special virtue, that gets her killed. So the play seems, on the whole, to have a kind of negative attitude towards exceptional people or special people, right? If you have exceptional talents or exceptional virtues, they're more likely to land you in trouble than to actually help you. All right, if we have this Song of the Virtues that Mother Courage and the cook sing while they're begging for food outside of this parsonage. If you look on page 69, you saw sagacious Solomon, you know what came of him. To him complexity seemed plain, he cursed the hour that gave birth to him, and saw that everything was vain. How great and wise was Solomon! The world, however, didn't wait, but soon observed what followed on. It's wisdom that had brought him to this state. How fortunate the man with none. You saw courageous Caesar next, you know what he became. They deified him in his life and had him murdered just the same. And as they raised the fatal knife, how loud he cried, "You too, my son." The world, however, didn't wait, but soon observed what followed on. It's courage that had brought him to that state. How fortunate the man with none. Now, all of these little virtue songs refer to one of the children, right? These first two, sagacious Solomon, how great and wise, courageous Caesar, who do these refer to? Yeah, these are both about Eilif, yeah. Eilif even was told by the general, right, you have the makings of a young Caesar. You heard of honest Socrates, the man who never lied. They weren't so grateful as you'd think. Instead, the rulers fixed to have him tried, and handed him the poisoned drink. How honest was the people's noble son. The world, however, didn't wait, but soon observed what followed on. It's honesty that brought him to that state. How fortunate the man with none. And this child, yep, Socrates is Swiss cheese, yes. St. Martin couldn't bear to see his fellows in distress. He met a poor man in the snow and shared his cloak with him, we know. Both of them, therefore, froze to death. His place in heaven was surely won. The world, however, didn't wait, but soon observed what followed on. Unselfishness had brought him to that state. How fortunate the man with none. And this one refers to, then, Chaplain, yes. Right. In her kindness, perhaps does more harm than good, particularly to herself. Now, there are some people who make out well in the play, though, right? If we look at some of these characters who are, we have a lot of characters who are named only by their sort of professional function. Right, like the chaplain and the cook. And I think we can also probably put Yvette into the same category as these, even though she's not named by a professional function. What is Yvette? Yeah, Yvette is a prostitute, exactly. So what these characters have in common with Mother Courage and her family is that they're not combatants, right? They follow the army around, they make their living from the army, but they're not soldiers, they don't fight. They're what are called camp followers. Camp followers are people who follow around in an army's wake. Often they'll do little jobs for soldiers. They'll sell things to soldiers. Armies used to have, groups of prostitutes that would follow them around as well, right? This was all sort of fairly common, right? Now, how sincere a man of faith is the chaplain? You're smiling at this. Why?
Because of things like
story that told about the cook and the chaplain.
Okay, yeah.
And the opinions the cook had on the chaplain.
He has a very unhealthy view of women. And he does seem to be constantly trying to creep into Mother Courage's bed, right? So it's, not a very private wagon. What else might suggest to us that the chaplain may not be a man of especially powerful faith? When the Catholic army shows up in scene 2, what's the first thing the chaplain does? He tries to run. And when he can't, does he maintain his faith in the face of steadfast opposition? Yeah, but look on page 24, right? Well, I'll be going to. Indeed, if the enemy is so close as that, it might be dangerous. Blessed are the peacemakers is the motto in wartime. If only I had a cloak to cover me. I ain't lending no cloaks, not in your life, I've been had too often. But my faith makes it particularly dangerous for me. Mother Courage gets him a cloak, goes against my conscience, this does. Now you run along. So yeah, the first thing he does is hide his faith, and then when he can't get away, he changes out of his clerical togs and doesn't put them back on until the truce is declared, right? When he disappears from the play. So rather than standing steadfast for his religion, he follows along the army that is fighting for the opposite cause as long as it's convenient for him. So the religious authorities don't come out of this looking very good, right? What's his opinion on war? How does he feel about war?
He said, well, actually, this is my quote. Peace makes me sick. Mankind must perish by fire and sword. We're born and bred in sin. And I thought that was like, that's his point of view. That's the point of view that I think Brecht was trying to push. That quote represents like that mentality that the war breeds in the people. Like, so I mean, it's fairly common for people to just be like, yeah, that's what happens.
Well, the chaplain, in a certain sense, benefits from war, right? If we look at the way he describes it on page 52, right? I told you I'm not a woodcutter by trade. I studied to be a pastor of souls. My talent and abilities are being abused in this place by manual labor. My God-given endowments are denied expression. It's a sin. You have never heard me preach. One sermon of mine can put a regiment in such a frame of mind, it'll treat the enemy like a flock of sheep. Life to them is a smelly old footcloth, which they fling away in a vision of final victory. God has given me the gift of speech. I can preach, so you'll lose all sense of sight and hearing. So what is the goal of his preaching? Yeah, to get you fired up to fight, right? To get you to line up that bayonet and shove it in the other guy's guts. This is not a faith of peace and love here, right? So war gives him a chance to get people fired up.
Kind of like what they did in the Crusades, in the Byzantium, and the.
Yeah, I mean, sure, those were, to an extent, wars of religion as well, right? But it's rare that a war of religion is exclusively or remains a war of religion. And that's part of Brecht's point here, right? The 30 Years' War was the ostensible reason or the original reason anyway, was Protestant armies from Northern Europe coming into what is now the Czech Republic to protect the rights of Protestants to worship freely in the city of Prague. Now, this quickly drew in a whole lot of other armies and other interests that didn't particularly care about the religious rights of a minority group in a small city in Central Europe. What they wanted was money and land. And war is a way to get both, to generate both. So the chaplain helps keep the fires of war going with his preaching. What about Yvette? She makes out pretty well too. Right? When we first meet her, she's a prostitute who nobody in the army will touch because they think she's pregnant. Where does she end up? Yeah. She ends up a countess. Right? She's able to get her hooks into a nobleman who's about to die. And when he does, she inherits his estate. The cook, by the time he exits the play, has inherited an inn and gone off to do that, right? So the characters who are in it for themselves, by and large, are the ones who prosper. And this is part of the larger message that Brecht wants you to get out of this. This is the idea of war that he is trying to sell you, is that, look, the people who fight, the people who start wars are completely divorced from any concern for the people who are actually harmed by them. And the only people who come out of the war okay are the opportunists, who are willing to look for their own chance and take it when it comes. So war and capitalism and accumulation are tied together in this particular formula, right? War is a money-making machine. This is why Mother Courage keeps complaining about what's going to happen when the war ends. Right? War breeds scarcity, raises prices. Peace breeds prosperity, lowers prices. All right, so anybody have any questions? Does this make a little bit more sense to you now? Yeah, I mean, you don't have to like it. You probably still don't. But I hope that this at least gives you some sort of framework for understanding it. All right, so next time we're going to be doing Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. So just be ready for that. And again, if you read Rosencrantz and Guildenstern for today, just make sure that you read Mother Courage for next time and you'll write on that, okay? All right.